Galactic Command, June 21st, Galactic Time, John B. Ross, Commander. Polonus 756A, Explorer Spaceship 14. Main link, GC Polonus Earth. Additional link, Mothership Earth 11, Polonus 143. On June 15th, 2155 GT, Articles of Peace were consummated between Galactic Command and the Antarian Sanctum. The articles, known as the Bilateral Withdrawal Treaty, were signed on Antares 6 by Command Council Admiral Gates and all sitting council members. The treaty moves the boundaries of the Antarian Sanctum to half the pre-war area and creates a full war zone known as the Antarian Occupied Territory. No Antarian vessels will navigate within the occupied territory without prior permission, escort, and full representation of ships' orders and destination. All prior Antarian planets and outposts existing before the hostilities will be retained by Galactic Command. Monitoring of all Antarian weapons testing will be required. A listing of all commerce provided to Earth Polonus Link. Violations of the battlefield or monitoring requirements will be considered a full act of war and treated accordingly. The ensuing period of peace was proclaimed by Command Group Admiral Gates. In attendance from ESS 14 were Commander Ross, Commander Hugh Lindsay, and Lieutenant Commander Walter Kaczynski. Commander Ross was presented by Admiral Ebert with the solemn order of battle for the victory at the Marigold star system, forcing the Antarian fleet surrender. Commander Lindsay received a citation by Admiral Ebert for the meritorious battle star. The Valor Commendation was bestowed upon Lieutenant Commander Kaczynski. A 5-day leave aboard the mothership was granted by Admiral Ebert to senior crew members. Commander Lindsay and myself have left ESS 14 for the mothership and downtime. Ross, commanding ESS 14.
The Nebula planet begins after the end of the Antarian War. Articles of peace between Galactic Command and the Antarian Sanctum are being signed. It's called the Bilateral Withdrawal Treaty. All the sitting council members and Admiral Gates are in this area signing it as the Antarians are marched before Galactic Command. Ross is there with Commander Lindsay, his second-in-command, and Lieutenant Commander Walter Kaczynski to get recognition for their bravery at the Battle of Marigold that brought the end of the Antarian War. Ross and Lindsay are next seen late at night at a mothership pit bar. After 4 years of battle, they are sipping on highly charged drinks, Brumax, in the blue light of the pit bar. Ross thinks back how the Antarian Raffic was killed at Marigold, resulting in the Galactic Command victory. Lindy and Ross now wonder where Admiral Ebert is sending them into the galaxy. They raise their Brumax into the air and say, "May the Antarians never rise from the ashes." Admiral Gates wanted all the Antarian upper command on prison planets, but the Council stopped him. At that time, he spots Nancy Burke, an old acquaintance, a reporter called a Bender, and he makes the remark to Lindy that she looks like hell. She brings out information about Zariak's empire from the Antarian War annals, classified information. And then she tells Ross that she's been selected as a viewer bender on his ship on the next voyage. Something big is up. Ross says nothing big is left, but Nancy brings up the fact that they may be searching for non-human intelligent life, the Zorka. Ross thinks back to how he met Nancy on Mark of 5, years ago on his first assignment. They were both much younger then. Ross and Lindy end up getting into a wild row with two rogues across the pit bar. Ross demonstrates his Proficiency 14 defense skills. Command security descends upon them during the fight. He demands to talk to Admiral Ebert as they are taken away into a tube. They spend 3 hours in a containment tub. Force field opens and Admiral Ebert, accompanied by 3 admirals, walk into the containment tub. He says, "You're going on a long voyage now, John. The nearest planet next to the Nebula planet is Axion Baroma 7. The Nebula planet is 3 weeks beyond Baroma. They're getting underway in 4 hours. Security Chief Kaczynski brings them back to ESS-14. Something must have gone wrong with the survey party out at the Nebula planet. They approach ESS-14, Ross's ship. Kaczynski steers the large barge freighter as they approach Ross's ship, ESS-14. They move along the sky pilot bays and are soon inside. They are scanned by the ship's computer called Polonus. Inside the sky pilot bays, he looks at his 15 ships still remaining after the Battle of Marigold. They are singed and burnt from battle confrontations. Lindy begins arguing with the Polonus as Nancy Burke half smiles. Ross tells her she should see Dr. Mike Pfeiffer because she doesn't look good. Ross is next seen in the commander's cabin under the Locust, the central command of the Explorer spaceship. If he needs to, he can emerge in the center locus just by going up a spiral ladder from his cabin. There's a meeting coming up very shortly, and they're waiting for engineer Frank Muldoon. He looks at a picture of his parents' home on Vega 14. His father is still an intelligence officer. Just looking at him makes Ross nervous. He moves along the tube toward the locus doors. The command planets are highlighted in a blue logo, and underneath it's stamped Authorized Personnel. He looks at the mother ship's hull and the viewer ahead. Everyone stands as he enters the locust. The bearded Muldoon arrives on the locust. He tells Ross that the coils need a quick fix. They're supposed to have a 10-day shutdown before engaging in another voyage. Ross is about to begin the meeting, but Commander Alvarez has not arrived. But Ross starts his message from Admiral Ebert anyway.
Vessel Explorer Spaceship 14. Your ship has been chosen to travel to the Nebula planet, so named not because of its actually being a nebula, but because of its proximity to Nebula EG 1632, also known by astronomers as the Panhandle Nebula. Nebula EG 1632 is actually farther away from the Nebula planet system than a typical binary. Planet GSS 11-891, the Nebula planet, orbits the star Algerian, a Class 8 blue star with a year equal to 1.9 galactic years and is 1,700 light years from Mothership 13. There are 11 other planets in this system. Planet GSA 11891 has a thin atmosphere with no sign of sustained life. Terrestrial protective gear is needed on the surface. The oddest observation, even with an extended position for a potential binary, is the complete lack of gravitational pull between the Algerian system and the nebula. Any compacted or collapsed star or gravity trough should have some effect on the system. 2 galactic years ago, Command sent the first survey parties to study the nebula for a possible central gravity trough or compacted star within the nebula, and to understand the nebula's relationship to planet GSA 11891, colony engineers from the mothership were ordered to construct a habitable living area and laboratory for studying the nebula. 6 months later, a party of 35 volunteers from the various space institutes arrived on Axion Baroma 7. They were transported a distance to the Nebula planet by a supply ship provided by the Contron Syndicate. Additional supplies and foodstuffs were also carried on this mission. The Antarian War did not affect their operations. On 14 Biogress 2153 GT, the Contron vessel arrived in orbit around the Nebula planet. Shuttle vessels began delivering personnel and supplies to the surface compartments. All was normal when the freighter left and the scientific party began its work. Dr. Ellison and a team of 5 set out on 10 October 2154 GT from the Axion Baroma 7 station and arrived on schedule 23 days later. As you know, Dr. Ellison's reputation is unmatched. A pupil of Ronald Eldridge, his theories on time dilation from non-matter sources have been added to Eldridge's discoveries. Dr. Ellison was anxious to explore the meaning of the linear energy moving into the third sector, and he was to carry the project further. Additional probes and actual manned expeditions were deemed necessary and began on 26 Columbia 2154 GT. The first sign of actual difficulty began sometime later, 13 Planeta 2154, when Command received notification on the AZ frequency of another probe loss and all 6 occupants missing in the nebula. The report was sub-captioned by Dr. Ellison himself. Section Order 3215 was issued by this office. Further manned exploration of the nebula was to cease. Unfortunately, no messages were received from the Nebula planet until 18 Sol 2155 GT. Dr. Ellison and 3 members of his team disappeared into the nebula on 19 March 2155 GT. All remaining personnel were ordered evacuated. The Contron Syndicate was ordered to send out a freighter immediately. However, communication became almost non-existent because of increased interference of additional linear energy sources having moved into the 3rd sector. The freighter is overdue by 4 weeks at the time of this message, 9 May 2155 GT. And there is an additional complication. Intelligence reveals an Antarian involvement.
Yeah, I should have guessed that, said Ross, glancing back at his crew.
Antarian gunner vessels were chased from the Axion Baroma system by sky pilot ships. John, what we fear is another Antarian involvement in the situation, which is not needed with a signed peace treaty. When you arrive on Axion Baroma 7, you will receive your rendezvous orders from a coded intelligence box now in the custody of Commander Donaldson. The code for the box has been placed in the retrieval section of Polonus 756A. The final leg of your journey to the Nebula planet will be with an accompanying command vessel. You will be the senior officer, the accompanying vessel's commander, reporting to you. Finally, Nancy Burke, the viewer bender aboard your vessel, is a historic observer. And I can tell you this is of historic significance. All cooperation and access within reason will be given to Nancy Burke. You will understand why when you receive your final orders on Axion Baroma. You and your crew were selected for this mission because of your outstanding record in the Antarian conflict and your post-war experience. John, I'm counting on you and your crew. This voyage, the 24th of ESS-14, could be significant, not only for your ship, but for all of Galactic Command. Good luck.
At the end of the message, Lindy says to Ross, "There has to be more to this, John. Energy lines are strangely emerging from the nebula. Energy lines like they've never seen before. He thinks the Antarians have stuck their collective noses into this." Ross returns to his cabin, still tired from the war and his time in the pit bar. When he awakens, he enters the Cambion chamber for about an hour. He puts on his transit suit and goes to his favorite hiking area, a place on Markov 4, where he had his first assignment. He begins thinking about Ellison and why they sent him out to the Nebula planet. Is there evidence of a Gorka civilization? He climbs to the Orange observation tower and thinks about the Gorka River Valley where falsified bodies were found years ago, but the name stuck. Then he thinks of Markov 4, how he had fallen in love, and how she was gone. Back in the cabin, he changes into his new Navy uniform. Lieutenant Alvarez, who was late for the meeting in the Locust, accompanies him in the conveyor car. He tells Alvarez to loosen up, maybe work with him on her defensive skills. It's 14 days to Axion Baroma 7. They head to propulsion. Nancy Burke is with Muldoon, listening to his technical mumbo-jumbo. She lets Ross know the story that she is about to bend is very big, and then he asks about her condition. Her condition bothers him. She doesn't understand spaceflight and Muldoon's quick course on how the ship's coils work. The function of the coils, says Ross, is to bend space. Space is then pulled back as the ship moves ahead. There's a 320 focus plane for emergency speed. The perifield is pulled through the bent space. Then he gets information on Baroma. There's a governor named Bismuth. It's a reckless desert. A pustule, says Nancy. Her eyes flooded. She says the therapy is kicking in and maintains that she's all right. She thought the voyage would be a good diversion. Lindy comes on an emergency channel and requests to speak privately with Ross. There's a priority message, Lindy says, from Ebert. The Antarians are on this mission on Explorer Spaceship 14. There's no indication of Antarian vessels anywhere along the route. Nancy might be a spy. Plotters have been killed on the mothership. All the communication with Lindy is on a channel called an AZ channel, which shields all communications. Everyone on his ship now is suspect. It's as if the treaty was signed, but the war continued. Nancy Burke is in the galley. She wouldn't cut a deal with the Antarians. She relays to him how she always wanted to be a bender. She says she knows that his father was in intelligence. Ross is stunned that she knows that information. He asks her to leave that fact undercover. Then he realizes how he's only known Nancy from passing throughout the years. Her father was caught in a war attack. Then he thinks about his best friend Craig Duggan's death at the hands of Antarian coursers. Mary Karinsky, an old friend, associate of Dr. Pfeiffer, passes by. Pfeiffer is better than Ross in his defensive skills at level 14. Alvarez will be involved in sparring. An image of John being floored by Pfeiffer is played back on the wall viewer. Ross demands that Pfeiffer tell him the extent of Nancy Burke's problem, but Pfeiffer refuses to divulge that information. Ross then tells Polonus to keep Nancy Burke under surveillance. Ross has had a good workout with Pfeiffer. He moves into a secure shuttle to meet Lindy again. Another AZ field shields all communications. Lindy puts in the disk. The entire command group is on the disk and Ebert speaks. A body of a Zorka being was found on the Nebula planet 6 months ago. Ellison was sent out with his team to find the Zorka place of origin. The Antarians were aware of this discovery, and they may try to steal the technology. There's been tampering of the computers on the mothership. There's a possibility of infiltrating an Explorer spaceship. Ross's sealed orders are on Axiom Baroma with Commander Steve Donaldson of ESS 27. It's an act of war if the Antarians have violated the bilateral withdrawal treaty. Ross elevates ship status to battle alert and says, "I can face anything knowing what I'm facing." He thinks of the Antarians, their red eyes, their oversized muscular bodies, and their short mass of white hair and greenish teeth. He tries to imagine the distant planet where the Gorka body was found under the nebular expanse. Maybe the Antarians just want to continue the war. Axiom Baroma's main city is under a domed oasis. ESS 27 and Steve Donaldson are missing. Baroma was established as an open society. Everything is out of order. There's a series of small colored structures in the haze on a high plain. Stucco buildings. Everyone flies to a waiting skimmer in the hot, dusty air. He moves up the stairs in the building to the governor's office. Governor Wilfred Busmith is an idiot. Ross is annoyed. Busmith brings up the fact that Jack Bragg, a rogue commander, proceeded on course without Ross. Donaldson, he thinks, was with Bragg, and Commander Bragg told me he was in charge, says Busmith. Ross thinks back to all the times that Jack Bragg had jeopardized personnel, and he shouts out, "How do you steal and explore a spaceship?" He goes to full battle alert and thinks about this wasted trip to Axiom Baroma 7. He's back in orbit. Jack Bragg put ships in jeopardy during battles. He gets underway immediately. ESS 27 is hiding somewhere. They cannot locate ESS 27. He thinks about Bragg, how he makes friends so easily, but the man had no sense of responsibility. Out of orbit and still livid at Bismuth's stupidity, Rip sends a message to Bragg wherever he is, and a message to possible Antarians, saying that they were in direct violation of the bilateral withdrawal treaty. He tells Nancy, "You'll be there to bend it for history," and she strangely says, "I hope so, Commander, I hope so." On the way to the distant Nebula planet, Ross hurls Pfeiffer to the mat, stunning the doctor. Ross is preparing to send an SAV to the Nebula planet's surface once they arrive. Strange energy lines are subdividing all over space emanating from the nebula. Upon closer examination, they are found to be octagon energy packets. The nebula is without any gravitational attraction. Muldoon tells him there's a change in the Eldridge wave ahead of the ship's propulsion, and Ross can only say that Dan Bragg sold us out. Even though the Antarians are Ross's enemies, he still respects them. He doesn't understand what's coming from the nebula and how it's affecting the ship. It's at that time he finds out from Nancy Burke that she has recombinant altoric disorder, the cells coming unglued in her tissues. An ACRA enzyme is not working. Ross is stunned and saddened by this news from his old friend. He thinks about Jack Bragg later on and how human greed still abounds. He enters the shuttle to see the nebula from above the ship. Magenta frozen gases swirl ahead. They are in a proximity to a gravity trough. He had never felt so remote at this distance. In a few days, the nebula would completely overshadow the sky. Gil Webb, his science officer, puts it on magnification. There's a fuzzy image of ESS 27 and the nebula planet. An SAV leaves ESS 27 for the Nebula planet. Ross sends out his sky pilot ships, but ESS 27 is still distant. It's almost as if Bragg were inviting an attack. Later on, Muldoon soon informs him that ESS 27 is preparing for breakaway speed. Ross fires at the ship, but they aren't in range, and the Drak beams dissipate. The gravity star ahead is being turned off and on, which is impossible. Ross assembles a surface party for landing on the Nebula planet. Nancy Burke will be accompanying him. They find in their scans, as they look at the little piercing sun inside their enclosures on the surface, Bragg and 4 Antarians had been inside the enclosure. The original research party was here 3 months ago. Polonus finds that the distress beacon was working, but severed at the antenna. Lindy informs him that the energy packets are raising havoc across the sky. The outpost party had left the enclosure quickly. He looks up as the nebula glows brighter. Nancy is resting. Lindy has no answer to the time and gravity displacement produced by the gravity trough. Something inside the nebula is turning off and on. Dr. Ellison, being a premier scientist in command, must have known something is up. They studied the Zorker genetic material, the not-human durospinal bases. At that time, Polonus finds out that the Zorker is beyond the nebula, according to Ross. The alien Zorker had disconnected the antenna. Alvarez says that Bragg in ESS 27 has gone into the nebula. Bragg had cleared all computer cells in the enclosure on the Nebula planet before he left for the nebula. Nancy collapses suddenly. Ross calls Pfeiffer and immediately makes plans to get her back to the ship. Death was not too far away. He wanted to get his hands around Jack Bragg's neck and proclaims that this little scenario is the last desperate act of the Antarian cause. He informs the crew as to why they're heading into the nebula, because of the Zorker presence. He says it's historic. Next, he runs into Mary Korinsky outside the Metafact. Nancy Burke's system is shutting down. She had made it clear that she wanted to be buried in space. That time, Rip tells Ross he's taking a big chance by going into the nebula. Muldoon concurs, but Ross is going in anyway. Polonus informs him that the energy lines, were now widened and visible to the naked eye. More packets are within the thousands, and thousands of packets are appearing. Ross shakes his head and just says, "What are they doing?" Pfeiffer gives Ross a breakdown of Nancy Burke's genetic structure. It's all coming apart and he can't do anything about it, and it's driving him crazy. She looks as if she's already dead as she's sprawled out in the Metafact bed. He thinks about Nancy Burke after one of the battles during the war when they met. She was unfazed, just sipping on a brumac as the battle continued. Muldoon then tells him the nebula is affecting the coils. A violent thrust shook the ship several times. The coils are shutting down. There's an internal compression of the coils that will take place in 10 minutes, vaporizing the ship. He looks for Alvarez, but she's not there, and Polonus has been disabled. Coil numbers are zooming down toward zero. Muldoon and Ross head below. They check everything along the way. Onto the walkway into the belly of the ship, there are a series of thundering booms. In 240 seconds, the coils will begin shutdown. There's a small silver box on a junction booster that shouldn't be there. Ross pulls it away, but a magnetic tug snaps it back in place. Drak beams fire across the lower part of the ship. Ross looks up as Alvarez aims a weapon at him, but another weapon is fired and Alvarez is knocked off the catwalk. Her bloody folded body flips over down toward the coils. Ross gets the box upward and hurls it outward. Mariah Alvarez is dead. The coils move back to positive with only seconds left, and he says to Lindy, who fired the Drak beam to kill Alvarez, "How close is close?" Polonus says that sabotage was under the locus. He wants to know what drove a young woman over to the Antarians. There's a break in the nebula ahead, but Ross wants to get out of the nebula. Muldoon has been injured, with a blue patch across his skull, and argues with Polonus. The nebula is definitely breaking up as they move through it. Pfeiffer is in the Metafact. Nancy Burke just died. Ross moves into the conveyor tubes. He's unsure what is beyond the nebula. He just keeps walking, unnerved about Nancy Burke's death. He and Pfeiffer enter the Cambion. They move up a mountain trail a few thousand feet up. In the distance, he points out Mount Neurotic, third bump to the left. Then he talks about the American Indian culture, how black elk needed a central place, a place where everything meets. Pfeiffer says it's like the Elias sect movement. Ross thinks back to Mount Neurotic and Mark of Four. They reach the top of the other peak as Ross stares out the horizon. Ross brings the silver vault with Nancy's remains outside the ship. A large object is somehow pulling them forward. There's no sign of Bragg or the Antarians. Perhaps this whole thing is a Zorka artifact, taking them ahead. There's a dim star glow in the background. The entire solar system has been enclosed. They used to call them Dyson spheres. The gravity trough is in the middle of the enclosure. The enclosure had a normal exterior temperature, but an unthinkable energy output, pushing the lines of energy into space. ESS 27's coil trail is visible, but Bragg is not on frequency. There's no energy at all at the enclosure. Ross sends out a message to ESS 27. The coils are normal, but still being brought upward. Ross goes into the conveyor tube to Lindy's station on the rim of the Locust. Ross looks for the opportunity to break free of the enclosure. The warning tubes are flashing red. Pale vessels, 3 rotating spoke wheels, descend upon ESS 14. They are alien vessels. Glory be, says Lindy. Muldoon tells them they now have no maneuvering speed. All Drac beams have been charged. Ross sends out his message. In another vessel, ESS 27 swings around, and their Drac beams hammer ESS 14. Ross tries to reverse, but it's impossible to move the ship. ESS 14 only has 35% power in the Drac beams. Ross now gives the order to destroy ESS 27 and talks about the classic Antarian brutality. They prepare for breakaway speed as the retaining belts flash over them. ESS 27 produces a wild series of energy bursts. Ross's ship lurches and goes into a side spin. Ross then speaks to Commander Jack Bragg. There are Antarians on the viewer on ESS 27's Locust. Ross's Drac beams won't even fire even though they're at 100%. A white-haired Antarian steps forward. Ross recognizes him. Rafik, whom he thought died at the Battle of Marigold, is still alive. He talks about the Marsavik people, the aliens, and then he tries to equate the Antarians' past with humans, how the Antarians and humans had a common past. Ross seems more concerned about the green lines forming octagonal patterns heading around the sector. It's an extreme, dense energy field. Now 5 Zorka vessels appear ahead. There's an amber portal with a larger rim and 3 additional beams from other portals. Inside, they view a Zorka city. Energy is flying through the rim and back through space-time. The external hull temperature is rising on ESS 14. As they approach, twisted blue fibers like an iris. The yellow star is burning crisp in the distance. Odd electrical charges from disjointed pinpoints move across ESS 14. The exterior hull is about to crack, but space rips apart and Ross disappears into that crack in space. They report to Lindy that Pfeiffer is gone from the medevac in the Nebula. Somehow they disappeared into a crack in space. Ross's body accelerates toward the planet's surface with a dim view of the star. He's in a field in a circular garden on some planet. There are clouds over the hill and the sun burns in the afternoon. A small being moves forward, a being with dense blue hair covering his body and luminous blue eyes. With a widened snub nose and rosy lips and an almost human set of teeth, he speaks with a metallic voice. He talks about the cryptus and the enclosure and population centers. Ross wants to know why the Marsavik people are shielding themselves from the outside galaxy. The being tells him they deplore killing because it's the end of all possibilities. He said that Dr. Ellison knows. The Galactic Command and the Antarian Sanctum, according to this being, will be parceled. We are what we are, says the being. Advancement is not a criterion for us. When asked for his name, he replies that he doesn't require a name and tells Ross to follow the road. Ross wants to negotiate, but the being tells him there's nothing to negotiate. He prances through the tall grass and disappears into another mirror hole, a crack in space. Tiny footprints are on the dirt ahead of Ross. He runs up the grass to the hill. Below, on the other side of the hill, is a wide river but he spots Mike Pfeiffer on the road. He tells Pfeiffer that the beings are going to attack Command and the Sanctum. There's a small forested ridge near a fast-moving stream below. 3 men in blue command suits meet them. They are Delvers, scientists, who have been marooned here for several months. The Marsavrik people perforated the hull of their ship. Pink-hued needles line the woods toward long wooden lodges ahead. Dr. Ellison has made a makeshift lab using parts from his ship. Inside, with the portable lights hanging overhead, Ellison looks up with his men working. Ellison and his men are working at long tables, illuminated by portable lights ahead. Ellison speaks in a clear voice and warns about the Marsavrik people. Ellison said they're a race that demands anonymity. Controlling a collapsed star, according to Ellison, is an absurdity. Rafik is on his way back to the Cryptus. Energy will spread out like a giant cage, according to Ellison. He said that the Marsavrik people used him for human knowledge. Then he invites Ross to come through his field lab. He tells Ross that the Marsavrik people can travel within an assorted dimension, almost like the coils. Ellison is the one who studied under Dr. Ronald Eldridge, who created coil space travel for Galactic Command. Ellison tells Ross that he's working on burrowing into the other dimension, where they can move great distances very easily. He thinks he can get inside the dimension. The Marsavrik people have no fleet and no weapons. They are completely xenophobic. Why were Bragg and Rafik dealing with the Marsavrik people at all? Asked Ross. In the darkness of the starless cryptic night, a webbed moon rises in the sky. Ellison claims that they've given Rafik and Bragg something, and Ross wonders what they could have brought to the Marsavrik people. It has to be something the aliens could not have got on their own. The striations moving over Sector 3 are creating a barrier, said Ellison. Ellison talks to Pfeiffer, who is still upset about not curing Nancy Burke's disease, is actually looking at a breakdown of her tissues on his compact. Lindy produces a log and says that Ross and Pfeiffer are missing after a brief and indecisive battle with Jack Bragg and Rafik the Antarian. ESS 27, Ross and Pfeiffer have disappeared into another dimension. Polonus magnifies the intensity of the drag beam. Honeycomb patterns are forming over the entire sector. Lindy wonders if Ross and Pfeiffer are even alive. Rip tells him now they have no coil capacity in ESS 14. The energy packets are widening. Kerensky maintains that John is a very resourceful guy. But Gil Webb says the packets are surrounding us because someone has given them the coordinates. The signals are boosted. At that time they learn that Admiral Ebert and the admirals have moved on to Axion Baroma 7. Jack Bragg walks with the Serbians and Rafik on ESS 27. Rafik has offered him Caleb Zoria, the most intense power source in the galaxy. Jack Bragg has given up coordinates of command transmit stations in the 3rd sector. All the Caleb Zoria is stacked behind the Sky Pilot ships on ESS 27. There's enough power in a fingernail-sized Caleb Zoria to power cities. Rafik talks about the Avorkdian code. Why did the Marsavrik people want the coordinates? Rafik is on speaker. Now Bragg begins questioning as to why they wanted the coordinates. Rafik puts Bragg under arrest and says he's being brought to a planet called Scavia Tangle. He tells Bragg that Ross has issued the Complor, some Antarian challenge issued by defeat. He needs to kill Ross and to avenge the defeat at Marigal. He does not trust the Marsavrik people. The orifice is closing, and Rafik doesn't think that they can move ESS 27 through the orifice. All Drac batteries are charged. Dr. Ellison invents a way into the other dimension. Passing into the other dimension never was accomplished before in command science. A few steps inside the dimension represent kilometers, but they need compact air supplies inside the void. They must find a way out of the Cryptus. Standing above the river in the valley, Ross is off-planet very easily with Ellison inside the dimension. The sun only looks as if it's a few hundred meters away, but the collapsed star is pulling them, even in the dimension. Pfeiffer wants to contact the Marsavrik people directly. Another opening has appeared away from the star. They need to notify command, according to Ross. They burrow back to the 3rd planet. Something is traveling away from the sun, and it's identified as ESS 27 moving toward the orifice. The orifice remains closed. The gravity trough remains. They later move toward the ship within the dimension. The Antarian is running the ship. He sees Bragg and the tug drag on the ship. In propulsion, 3 Antarians are killed when Ross and Pfeiffer leap outside the dimension. The Caleb's Orier is how Bragg was paid off and convinced to steal the SS-27. Sound does not travel between dimensions. He moves into Corridor B with Rafik in command. Dr. Ellison gets the restraining harnesses and they are placed around Rafik and Bragg. Then the belts are released. The Antarian is screaming at him as Bragg tries to convince Ross that he was kidnapped and says, "Thank God you're here." The Antarian calls Bragg a truth dragger. Ellison breaks the tug drag. The ship will be taken into the star's Xanath plane, a swirling accretion, a slow, spinning mass into the collapsed star. They need to burrow back and out of this trough soon. If they could find out how the trough works, they could help our own science, according to Ellison. Pfeiffer is still trying to figure out Nancy Burke's problems. She was exposed to something causing the enzyme malfunction. High-frequency waves are occurring all at once, says Pfeiffer. 3 types of frequencies that change the enzyme qualities. Somewhere she was exposed to the frequencies. In 17 minutes, they will be sucked into the gravity trough. They need to burrow back now. Ellison's man O'Leary is suddenly stuck within the dimensional opening. In 29 minutes, they'll have a quick death in the Xanath plane. Ross is on frequency. He tells the Marsavrik people that we don't harbor any aggression toward you. Rafik and Bragg are marched into propulsion. The Antarian is shouting to threaten them, Ross. In 15 minutes, they will be stretched beyond comprehension into the gravity trough. Pfeiffer suggests that they use an intense barrage of frequency waves greater than the ones that hit Nancy Burke to alter the Marsavrik people's genetic structure. Power levels and frequencies can be relayed by Pfeiffer. The ship is shaking violently, beginning to be stretched. An air-splitting crescendo surrounds them. With nothing left to lose, Ross produces the frequencies as relayed by Pfeiffer. The ship is released, and they move through the orifice back into the nebula. Bragg and Rafik are missing. Ross gives the order, shoot to kill. The raw green energy packets are still spewing into the 3rd sector. One continuous energy packet surrounds the sector now. The power is incredible, according to Ellison. Rafik and Bragg appear with battlefield beamers. Ross tries to offer Jack Bragg a deal and demands the Complor from the Antarian. Bragg decides to go with the Antarian as Ross and Pfeiffer are cast adrift in an SAV that only has 5 days of air. Ross is disgusted with himself that he even let them out of the restraints. After 49 hours, the craft is spotted by Lindy, who rescues them. The Gorker energy fields have cut off the 3rd sector from command. Ebert and other vessels are now on their way to Axiom Baroma. The applause starts when Ross enters ESS-14 through the Sky Pilot bays. He tells them the Marsavrik people are parceling up command and the Antarian sanctum. He just shakes his head and said that Bragg should have been busted a long time ago. He gives notes for a transmission to Axiom Baroma 7. Ebert is going to attack the Cryptus, which seems foolhardy. Green energy crisscrosses the stars with a low, resonating hum, like the energy has been turned up into unbounded power. The ship's power returns and Lindy is stunned. Lindy tells Ross we've been moved. Ross doesn't understand. He tells him the entire sector has been moved into another galaxy. The spiral galaxy in the distance is the Milky Way galaxy. The entire sector is on the edge of Galaxy M81. Ross makes his final entry 2 months later. Axiom Baroma 7 is now the main link of Galactic Command. There is no mothership. They're in Galaxy M81. The main goal is to align new planets and establish a new Galactic Command. He makes contact with members of his own family. Axiom Baroma 7 is now an extensive military base. There are 4 sitting admirals there and 8 remaining commanders. Busmith has long since fled the planet. ESS ships, according to Chris Keller, Ross's friend and commander, will begin mapping planets. Keller wants to avenge what the Marsavrik people did to Galactic Command. But Ross tells him that they've misjudged him. There's nothing to avenge. It's our own damn fault.